that's the perfect time to kind of take a step back and kind of look at where you are and what you're doing. So I've kind of put this into two buckets. The first bucket is this is the time and an opportunity to check your social game. This is not a social media talk. I don't know if they're doing that this weekend or not. That's definitely a thing that we can spend a whole hour or way more on. But I just want to touch on it briefly. And because I want to make sure that if you're not posting regularly, you need to be. But the trick to that is, what types of posts are you doing? As an artist, as somebody who's writing music and recording music, coming up with beats and the like all the time, hopefully, that's like what you're doing like most of the time. The what's and why's of your lyrical content. So these are post ideas, right? As you're writing a verse, as you're writing a chorus, as you're collabing with somebody else, you kind of need to have the mindset of a documentarian and put those things out there. Don't be afraid to tease people with, oh yeah, I was driving in my car and this idea came up and I, voiced it out on my digital recorder and make a post about that. Your fans want to engage with you on a super personal level. And if you've ever been to any conference or whatever, they're talking about social media, you've heard all this before. But it's always a great reminder to hear it again because we kind of forget, So here's just some ideas of that. Talk about what you're writing about. Talk about what you're thinking about. Throw some, live snippets of you in the studio or in your bedroom or your closet, working on demos or recording. Go live. Do Facebook Live, Instagram Live, whatever, interesting content. If you're having a writing session, take a few seconds, few minutes, and just, put that out there. Let people know you're active and what you're doing. You don't have to be elaborate with it. You don't have to, give away all your little secrets, but you want to appear like you're in the game and you're active in the game, all the time. Don't let it lag. And the main thing with that, too, is diversify your posting. So a couple of points to that is, number one, take ownership. Position yourself as an expert in your field. So even if you think you're not the biggest, best, greatest rapper or singer or drummer or whatever, it's okay. Take ownership over what you do. If you guys were in here with Ruslan's talk yesterday, after I was doing some improv and totally embarrassed myself, one of the things I thought was great, he said, he knows what his strengths are, those 4 or 5 things, and he just brings that over and over and over and over again. He's taken ownership over that. He's an expert in those 4 or 5 things that he really knows and sticks with it. That was amazing advice. Take that advice. And this is a big one, no more than 50% of your posts should be self-promoting. So if every time you're putting out content on socials and it's, I this, I that, or buy this, buy that, every single post, every single time, even if you're only posting maybe 3 or 4 times a week, eventually people are just going to tune you out. So if you take ownership of what you're doing and position yourself as an expert, that will actually take care of itself. A couple of guys that I think are really good follows on social media. Adriel Cruz, formerly Script. He's just funny. He's one of our clients, and he's just really good at diversifying his content. Just the best way to put it. Another guy, his name is Sam Hart. He's more of a worship artist. He just recently moved to the Nashville area. He's instantly just kind of embedded himself in the songwriting community. He's a producer as well, and he's really good at just if you follow his stuff, he'll just drop, like, here's 5 things that I learned today, or here's 5 things I know how to, tune this guitar for this microphone, super specific. But like, it's just really interesting. So those are 2 really good ones to follow. Another thing that would be a good thing is Social Media Examiner. This is actually it's a Christian-run organization, but they're just all about just social media 101. So that's another good media outlet to follow if you just kind of want to bone up on some of your social media skills. All right, so we talked about social. Now we need to talk about music. And the biggest thing that I will probably say a couple of times today is claim your DSP profiles. All right? We'll get to the next slide. I'll give you a little insider info on that. But if you don't know, you can actually go in and set up your own like Spotify profile or Apple Music profile, Amazon Music, like all of them. If you haven't gone in and claimed them, Pandora, all the like, do it like before lunch today, if you can. That's super key, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Your current catalog that's been out, if it's been out for 5 years, 3 years, 6 months, whatever, keep it relevant. Keep going back to it. Pull little snippets of things out of old songs and recycle them for things like social media posts. Keep that stuff going. And another thing you're going to hear me say a lot is don't drop and stop. That means don't just throw your music out there and be like, okay, I did it, I recorded it, it sounds great, now it's there, everybody consume it. Nobody's going to consume it, more than likely, unless it's really, 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 really good. It probably is, though. So a couple of just key points to that. Spotify, specifically, there's lots of tools in there that you guys as artists can utilize when your music's out there. Marquee is kind of their internal ad system, and it's really not that expensive. It's super worth it. Canvas, artist picks, update your profile. We'll talk about this again, but go in and change your avatar, change your cover image. It sounds really simple, right? Like, oh yeah, do it. If you haven't done it in like 6 months, at least go in and like throw a new image or something in your image artist gallery. YouTube Shorts is relatively new. Ruslan talked about that yesterday as well. Get in on that stuff early. Don't wait for like it to kind of come around and everybody's doing it. Like, start throwing out YouTube Shorts stuff like today. What was the thing? Oh, Ruslan said yesterday, if your first 5 TikTok videos, if you don't have, I can't remember the number. Did anybody remember the number? He said something about 1,000 plays or something. I can't remember the exact number, but he said if your first 5 videos just haven't done anything, just delete it and start over. That's really good advice. I actually didn't know that, so I'll have to go look at my TikTok. Pandora featured tracks. I don't know how much you listen to Pandora, but you can actually, as an artist, you can go in and record messages, so when that song plays and somebody hears it, your voice can come in after it and say, hey, I'm Kevin. Thanks so much for listening to my song. My new EP is going to be out next month. Go check it out. These are things that you can go in and take advantage of for free. Apple Music profile image. Think about doing some things like contests and giveaways. Even if you don't think you have anything to give away or entice somebody with, you do. I don't know, if you have T-shirts or swag, give some of that away in exchange for somebody watching your video or streaming your song or signing up for your email list. Email lists are super important. And yes, actually, absolutely, if you don't have a website or if you haven't updated it like in 2 or 3 years or in 6 months, another thing that I would recommend highly that you keep updated. And that really comes from not just a guy that works in the music industry every day, but also media, it's super important. There was something I was going to say, okay, about websites. Obviously, anybody and everybody can pretty much build a website. You can really almost do it on your phone now. But something that if you want to write down, I highly recommend it. It's super cheap and easy to do websites. I mean, if you know anything about WordPress, it's super easy to learn on your own. So if you can actually DIY it, do it. Take the time to do it. A theme that I use on WordPress, like ad nauseum, is called Enfold. It's spelled ENFOLD. You can get it at the Envato or ThemeForest website. It's like $60, which is like nothing. Once you import that into your WordPress site, go to, on the left side, if you're WordPress people, go to the Enfold little tab, and that will open up another set of tabs. And in that little set of tabs, there's a thing called Demo Import. And basically, you can build your website in like 2 hours and make it look banging, right? They even have some music-related demos, and it's great. So little insider stuff there for you. As we get into the next little part here, before I show you the slide that I want you guys to write down, want to just kind of put this bug in your ear as I continue to talk. Your in-game strategy for your music in general should not be to land on a playlist. That should be one component to what you're doing. But if everything you're doing is based on, I got to get on this playlist or that playlist, or it's been a waste of time, if that's your strategy, you need to rethink your strategy. So we're going to get into that real quick. But before we do, if you were wondering about claiming your DSP profiles, like how do I do that? Write down this website. This is a little bit.ly link to our website. Are some tips and tricks there. This is actually something that I developed for our clients, our label clients, because if you think maybe you're the only one that didn't know what DSP stood for, or didn't know how to go in and claim your artist profile on Pandora or Spotify, there are big record labels out there that have dozens and dozens of artists that also aren't too sure on that kind of thing either. So you're not the only one. I developed this little microsite just for that reason alone, because I kind of got sick of answering the same questions to our label clients over and over and over again. So I send them to this website. So here's a little insider thing. This is a kind of a hidden page on our website. So it's got a bunch of tips on there, but the main part is you will see direct linkage to going in and claiming your profiles on all the DSPs. All right, real quick, I just want to check my time. We're good. Before you are thinking about, my street date and when I'm going to release my new single or new EP or whatever, another couple things that you really need to be kind of thinking about ahead of the game. Again, here's another thing that's kind of put into two buckets. One would be marketing. The other is production. And this is talking about your budgets. I'm just going to kind of blow through this real quick. On your marketing side, writing and copy editing, I put that at the top because I think that's the most important at this level and something that is worth paying for. I promise you that. Publicity, potentially. There's one little thing about publicity, too, that you can potentially utilize a publicist to have direct contact with the DSPs. I'm not sure that all of them can, and I'm not even really sure that that's something that publicists advertise, but some of them do have relationships with editors and curators at the digital service providers and can potentially contact them on your behalf when you have a new release for playlists placements and things like that. So publicity could be something that you may want to budget for. Obviously, the obvious stuff for photography, social. Not everybody is good on Photoshop or Canva. You don't have to be. If you've got a budget to have somebody else do that for you, great. DSPs, platform-specific ads. I mentioned a moment ago, Spotify Marquee. That would be a great thing as an independent artist to utilize, especially if you want to kind of boost your Spotify numbers. And web, yes, I'm talking about websites again. I really think a website is important, and I will go as far at this conference even to say, in my experience at Syntax the last couple of years for sure, but going back to when I was a managing editor at CCM Magazine for the 5 or so years before that, it seemed like on the whole, hip-hop artists are just the hardest to go and just dig and learn about because they don't have websites. It's just, and when you find one, or if you eventually find like the Facebook page or whatever, the bio is like 3 years out of date. And as a former like media guy, like that would be so frustrating because oftentimes there wasn't a publicist I could go and contact and say, hey, do you have a recent picture I could use? Because I really want to do an album review or whatever. And I will admit, especially when I was at CCM, I put out so many like old pictures of artists that like went in print because they didn't update their stuff. And then I would hear about it later. And it's kind of like, well, sorry, but not my responsibility to make sure that your available assets are up to date. So that stuff really is important. And on the production side, obviously as artists, you guys are probably already thinking like production budgets and things like that, but just a couple of things to think about. Distribution. So most of you will probably utilize something like a DistroKid, Orchard. What's the other big one? TuneCore. So you know, it's been years since I've actually even been on those websites and actually put a release through, but like it's something like $75 or $85, something like that, to actually just put a single through. So obviously think ahead about those things. UPCs. Just as an example, if you're dropping an album of 9 songs, on average, it's going to cost you around $225 to purchase UPCs. Now, that's if you're dropping, 8 singles and then you're putting an album out. That's 9 UPCs. On average, it's going to cost you over $200. Graphic design for your cover art and things like that. We're going to talk about cover art here in a minute. And then music videos. Put 2 question marks by that. We may touch on that at the end here. All right, so a couple of questions that I got yesterday was, how soon should I be thinking about, I'm writing, I've got some demos, or I've got some, stuff in pre-production, and I'm ready to think about putting this stuff out. How far out should I be actually thinking and strategizing? What we like to say is, if you are at that point, don't think about a street date or release date for at least 4 months. Like, give yourself a really long ramp if you can. And here are some of the things that I highly recommend you do. These are the habit-forming things that I was talking about earlier, that I feel like if you can do that at this stage and develop these habits, it will go a long way for you. Start drafting narratives. Those are things like bios. We just talked about bios and how it's really important to keep all that stuff current. Artist bio, or if you're preparing an album, do a bio on your album. What's the general concept of the album? Do a song-by-song synopsis. You may think, oh man, this is a lot of work. It's worth it, especially when you can secure some potential media or things like that. If you can provide lyrics and song-by-song synopsis of your content, anything you can do to help media or distribution or potentially label, that kind of thing, anything like that you can put in your back pocket is huge. It's huge because so many aren't doing it. And it's at least the least amount of work you can provide for somebody at the next level. So at CCM Magazine, so many times I had to like write things that really should have been something that the artist or the artist team should have provided for me. Think ahead about things that you can be doing with your content, so it's not just music. I'm sure many of you use the YouVersion app, right? The Bible app. And how many of those like Bible studies and things are related to albums or songs? You know, think about ways you can diversify. You can take a song and what can you do with it? So things like devotionals, Bible studies, even if it's just something that you're utilizing just at your local church, like that will speak to so many people. So as you're writing music, as you're recording it, you know, start thinking now about how can I use this in other mediums. And also too, just some media opportunities. Start getting to know people at places like Rapzilla, YouVersion, Soul Mag, real close, CCM Magazine, New Release Today, GMA. Like, don't be afraid to, you know, find those people on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever and connect with them. You never know if they'll dialogue with you, and you never know where that networking can get you in the future. So it does work. You want to start thinking about your cover art. This should never be an afterthought. I didn't really have time to like I wanted to put like examples of like bad cover art versus good cover art. I also didn't want to embarrass anybody either. But we've seen our fair share of really bad cover art, and you think, oh, it's Spotify, it's Apple Music, it's like that big, nobody cares, nobody really looks at it. The editors do, and I know that because I talk to them every day, and I know I've had experiences where I've pitched songs that were really good songs, but they looked cheap. They looked like the cover art was just something that, oh, I forgot to do the cover. Let me just throw something together real quick and slap that on there before I put my song out. And, you know, it didn't get placed because, you know, the editor probably didn't even listen to it because they saw the cover and it was like, next, you know. So don't overlook that, and don't make sure that's not an afterthought. Plan for distribution. So even if you're 16 weeks out, right, think ahead about that stuff, not just for budgeting purposes, but the sooner you can get that stuff in the system, the better. Even if you're going to do it yourself, like TuneCore, DistroKid, whatever, if you happen to be a part of like a team or a label that has other means of distribution, kind of like what we do, again, what we preach to our clients all the time is the earlier the better. Do not wait to the last minute. The earlier you can get stuff. My main contact at Spotify, the thing that we talk about, we have a monthly call, is he always says, well, have you put that through on the pitch tool yet? And sometimes I haven't, and we'll talk about the pitch tool here in a second. But like, they're really going in there and listening to everything that's getting pitched. You might think, man, it's so oversaturated. There's like music just coming out all the time. It's just nonstop. They're really in there paying attention to what's being ingested into their systems. So the earlier the better. They always tell me, if you've got something and it's not coming out for 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, whatever, get it in. Get it in. The reason why I talk about narratives and drafting narratives and things like that, bios, song synopsis and things like that, the sooner you can have that and be done with it, that just gives you ammo to talk about and gives you things to talk about when you're potentially talking to, you know, media outlets for interviews, reviews, or DSPs for pitching, things like that. So like, as soon as you are done with a song, you should have, you know, your bio updated, and you should have a song synopsis put together for that. Again, the earlier the better. And if you're working on all this stuff 16 or more weeks out, this buys you time to find some of these things that you may be missing, like a distribution partner, or maybe somebody to do your cover art, things like that. So it's really just about prep work. So we're still in that 4-month out window, right? We're still there. So we're finalizing our narratives. The other thing that I highly, highly stress, and why that copy editing and writing thing was at the top of that budget line, is another thing that's notoriously bad with the hip-hop clients that I've been exposed to is grammar and writing is horrible. I'm just gonna be real. So put it in your budget to have a copy editor to edit your bios and your song synopsis. Like, hip-hop artists should be like on top of that, because everything you do is words, right? Like, that's your bread and butter. So hire a copy editor. I would just, hire a copy editor. Not for your songs, but for your bios, your song synopsis. And we're not printing CDs anymore, but even things like, your CD inserts and all that kind of stuff. It's super important. Also important, hire a copy editor. Don't forget that. Begin thinking about a publicity strategy. So if you have the budget to hire a PR firm, this really should be happening. You don't have to have your song fully done and recorded and all that kind of stuff. Like, start that dialogue early. Building the story is very important, and having somebody else come on board as early as possible. They can also help you build your story, because they know, just like I know, like what the DSP people are looking for, because I talk to them every day. Your publicists, they're talking to the media outlets all day, every day. So they know what those people need and what they're looking for. So they may be able to come in and guide and direct you on your story. It takes a team. It takes a village. Update your DSP profiles often. So again, this goes back to, whether you've had new music out or you don't have any new music out, set up your DSP profile. Go back to that link if you don't know how. And change your avatar every so often. Back in the day, it was kind of cool to, like, every week or whatever, you would change your Facebook profile image or all that. It's not so much like that way anymore. But on the DSPs, it's kind of important to, like, just show activity, that it hasn't just been, like, sitting there collecting dust. And the main point to that, too, is the editors and the DSPs, when I'm pitching them music and when I'm submitting songs through the pitch tool, specifically on Spotify, when they're reading the little narrative and they're listening to the song, you know what they're doing while they're doing that? They're going back and looking at your profile. They're looking at all your numbers and stuff too, your streaming numbers and your audience and all that. But they're actually going back and, like, do they have a gallery of images? And you would think these people are too busy to even notice that. They are actively doing that. So I can guarantee you that I've had great songs not get on playlists because the artist or the label team just has let their Spotify profile sit there and collect dust. Don't do that. Don't do that. That will set you back. So we're 16 weeks out. Start thinking about your release date, your street date strategy. So this is kind of more geared toward if you're releasing an EP or an album versus a single. If you're releasing singles, you definitely want to think about when you're releasing them and not just, like, drop it. I know that sometimes there is a strategy to just, like, drop a single without telling anybody about it and all that. And I think there's times and places for that, just to kind of depending on what your vibe is and, like, kind of what you want to do with that particular song and how that's setting up something in the future. But for the most part, you're going to want to set up a strategy for dropping new music. So this is the time when you want to start thinking about if you have an EP or an album. Don't drop an EP or an album without dropping singles first. That's really, in a way, kind of pointless. The main point to that is why you have one opportunity. So again, I'm going to use Spotify as an example. How many of you are familiar with the Spotify pitch tool? And have you used it? So if you've noticed, when you go in, if you're dropping an album or an EP, a multi-track project, when you go into the pitch tool, you can only choose one song to pitch, right? You have one shot to get that editor's attention for this whole project. So in other words, they're probably not going to listen to the other 4 or other 6 or other 8 songs. They're just going to listen to that one song you pitched. Now you're going to pitch your best song, right? So the purpose of dropping singles is to get your name in front of them multiple times. You know, why would you waste that opportunity, right? So thinking about a release strategy. Well, here's an example. So you say you're dropping a 5-song EP, and you want to drop it in November. Let's go back a month. Let's just pretend we're in September. You want to drop it November 5th because you don't want to drop new music really in the holiday season. That's a whole other discussion. You want to space those things out. So here's just a quick example of that. Single 1 drops Friday, September 3rd. Single 2 drops Friday, September 24th, 3 weeks later. Single 3 drops Friday, October 15th. Single 4 drops Friday, November 5th with your EP. So you have a 5-song EP. You've put out 3 singles prior to that. When you're dropping that whole project, you're dropping your 4th single. You've had 4 opportunities to wow that team over at Spotify or Apple Music or whatever with your release instead of just that one shot. Spacing them out is also intentional and important. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second, but you want to space those things out more than 2 or 3 weeks. This was like kind of a 3-week model. 3 weeks can kind of be a sweet spot. We typically tell our clients if you're going to drip out singles leading up to a full-length project, a month to 6 weeks is like a nice thing because it helps us build that narrative for each song as we progress toward dropping that full project. So now we've worked our way up. Now we're 8 weeks out from our street date. So we have, just in our experience, we've been doing digital distribution now for over 15 years. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. We hesitate to tell our clients, yes, send us your stuff 8 weeks out before your street date so we can start working it, because they'll wait till 8 weeks out. But then, Spotify tells us if you've got your content 6 months before release, we want it, right? So, but we understand, obviously, there's production budget, and there's budget, production time, all that kind of stuff. So it's not always ideal. These are just highly recommended suggestions. But 8 weeks out kind of seems to be the sweet spot to build the narrative with the DSPs before your project comes out. And I'm going to jump to something before I run out of time. Can y'all see that? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't been telling Riley over there to click the slides. So if that hasn't been super up to date what I'm talking about, that's my fault. That's totally my fault. Send me your email and I'll email you the presentation if you want it. Can you bump to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is an email from our CEO and founder, Tim Trudeau, that happened on Friday, October 8th at 7:32 a.m. So this was literally just the other day. And this was in response to a client whose name and likeness has been protected, so we don't embarrass them. But they sent us a track on Friday and said this needs to release on Tuesday. And it's a really great song. It's like really good. It's really good. And so, again, this is coming from, a label who we have told many times all the stuff that we've been talking about. And And so I wrote him back, and I said, hey, you're the boss. If you want to put it out on Tuesday, you can. But just reminding you, at the very least, Spotify, you have to go into that pitch tool and pitch that song 7 days before your street date. If you do it under 7 days, you physically can go in and do it less than 7 days out, but they have told us there's no guarantee that we're even going to see it or listen to it, and it won't show up on your release radar. So if you do it under 7 days, basically it will be a silent drop, right? So I just thought this was funny more than anything, but here was Tim's response to the client. We need 8 weeks to give you the best results. If a song is really good, it deserves 8 weeks of lead time. Anything less than 4 weeks is pretty much guaranteeing that it won't receive editorial support, meaning editors listening to it and potentially placing it on playlists. Remember, there are others who have been working their singles for weeks now, and editors will not slide things out of the way for what they would consider to be less prepared songs, even if it's good, unless it's a top 40 artist. So as long as you understand that the worst thing a label can do is spend all kinds of time working on and perfecting a track and then shove it out there with no lead time, may as well build a bonfire out of actual cash. And that is absolutely true. Maybe a little edgy, a little harsh, but to the point nonetheless, right? So I really don't want you guys to burn your cash, right? So who wants to do that? I'm actually gonna skip this slide, and basically I'd really want to do some Q&A. So to summarize, here's your 5 pro tips, right? Prep game. So this is going back to your socials, your DSP profiles, your website, your email list. Stay engaged, whether you're re-engaging with content that you've already dropped, or you're in anticipation of dropping new stuff. Always be prepping, never drop and stop. Lock in a budget early. You got to have one, right? Think of this is what you do. This is not just your passion, but this is what you want to do for a living. So you have to make an investment. I'm not saying you have to spend tons and tons and tons of money to do things right, but you got to have a budget. You got to allocate something to produce something. Real quick on going back to Spotify Marquee again. In the grand scheme of things, it's relatively inexpensive. But I think too, when you do a marquee ad, has anybody ever done a marquee ad in the room? We've done very few actually as a company, but I'm pretty sure once you put in the track you want to promote and fill in a couple of the fields that they have in there, I'm pretty sure that they even cap the spending at $250. Like you can't spend more than, it's either $250 or $500. And if you don't know what Spotify Marquee is, if you go to that link that I put up there a little while ago, there's a whole section on what that does. But essentially, it's like a pop-up ad. So if you're listening to stuff on Spotify, it will take over your screen and basically just promote your single or your album or whatever. Stay active in your DSP profiles. Always stay active in your DSP profiles. Do not let them sit there and collect dust. Otherwise, what's the point? Establish your story and strategize your releases. Those kind of go hand in hand. Really think about spacing out your releases, and if you're going to drop a full-length project, an EP or an album, drip out your singles to do that. Don't drop and stop. 8-week rule. Always remember the 8-week rule. And don't drop and stop. Continue to hustle. Continue to grind. Don't let your releases sit there and collect dust either, because there's so much you can extract out of that. So, a couple of resources that I would also recommend. We talked about Social Media Examiner at the beginning. Music Ally or Music Alley is a good free resource. It's essentially just like a music business aggregate of just daily news. And Music Biz World is another one that I particularly like to read. It's just kind of general, overall music business stuff. I think it's really important to also diversify kind of like what you're consuming inside the industry that you want to be working in. Don't just limit yourself to only taking in like Christian hip hop specific news or info. Really expand your scope because it's part of the same industry, right? So you really want to have a grasp at some level, even if it's a super high level, of kind of what's happening. On those two specifically, I get a lot of, they're like daily emails, and you can sign up for them and they're free. You get a lot of stuff, like Sony spent $9 bajillion buying something, and like that's the headline, right? And oftentimes there are things that I'm not really all that interested in, but you go and look at the email, and there really is, at some point within each one every day, there's something there that, at the very least, as you're networking, as you're working with our other artists, it's just funny how some of those just things that are happening in the industry kind of come up in conversation. And again, it all kind of goes back to feeding that thing about making you an expert in your field. That really goes a long way. So, yeah, that's a lot of information to throw at you in an hour. I actually wanted to get all that done in like 30 minutes so we could just talk and answer questions, but I didn't plan that out very well. So hopefully, I think he said 12:15 was when he wanted me to kind of maybe cut it off. So we still have about 16 minutes for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? And they could be specific, they could be general. Yeah. Yeah, I would say both and. Yeah, I may not be the answer probably you're looking for, but I think if you're working it as hard as you can on the build-up and employing some of these things, these habits, I think you're not going to let it slip, once it drops, right? You're going to be invested in it. So short answer, both and. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes, and yes. I mean, yeah, like leverage your audience. Leverage it milk it for all it's worth. I mean, if you can get them to buy into anything you ask them to do it. Like don't ever hold back on that. Because again, the more that somebody else can talk about you, the better, right? You're going to have to self-promote, and that's hard for some artists to do. Like a lot of artists don't like to do that. Some are really good at it. So if that's something that you think maybe isn't one of your strengths, maybe try and find some like artists that are really good at it and kind of see kind of how they're doing things and try to emulate that maybe. But absolutely, I mean, if somebody can do something for you, let them do it, especially if they're excited about it, right? Absolutely. I'm going to get to you next. You had your hand up raised early on. What was your question? Songwriter Sam Hart? Sam Hart. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Say that one more time. What does active recovery look like? Is that what you said? Maybe unpack that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a really good analogy, actually. You know, he said, he used the analogy of when you work out, you know, there's a high intensity part of the workout, and then there's a recovery phase, right? You go and walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes or whatever to kind of just like walk it out. Yeah, I mean, like, I think it can ebb and flow like that for sure. My main point, I think, would be just to encourage you to not let it just like go dark for a period of time. Yeah, like whether that's like your social posting or your, you know, even if all you're doing is just like changing your artist profile pic on your DSPs or whatever, you know, people will notice that. It just shows activity. So I would just, maybe just sum it up by saying, don't let it go dark. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, even if it doesn't have anything to do with music, right? Like you just get on there and like go on TikTok or whatever and do a survey or it just left my mind, but what's the thing where a stitch, you know, that kind of a thing? Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by don't let more than 50% of your posting be about the thing that, you know, you're known for. You know, like if some crazy thing happened in the world and you really want to like talk about it, like yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to get you next and then you after that. Thank you, Keita.
Check. All right. So as you have all those systems, is there any a website or anything that you recommend to track those things consistently as you come up with? I mean, I'm a producer, so I have checklists for how I make my music. But how do you track all of those things as you're making these different plans for each release?
Tell me a little bit more, like what are you wanting to track?
So like, is there a tool, for instance, you know, I know I could probably go into Excel and just make out a whole, you know, every release I'm going to do this,
Mm-hmm.
this, you know, do you guys have any, you know, just any tools or websites you recommend to track those things?
That's a good question. I think probably for everybody it's going to be different. Tim is going to hear this when he listens to this later, but I'm kind of big on like the apps that kind of like organization apps, and there was one that I'm not allowed to use. I'm not allowed to use anymore, and it's called Trello. Does anybody use Trello? Okay. When I was at CCM Magazine, that thing ran my life. Like if I didn't have something I put in Trello, like it just wouldn't get done. I don't know if that's where you're going, but like. We're basically a Google company, so like Google Drive and Google Sheets and all that, just for internal organization and things like that. Actually, I mean, like I really like those products. Cool thing about spreadsheets and all that with Google Drive is like you can broadcast, you know, those to other sheets and whatnot. So like that's been a super helpful thing. So. Yeah, I mean, I would say find one that works for you. There's many different options. Basecamp is another one. I don't know if there's a free version of that one, but yeah, find one that works for you that keeps you on task, and use it. Yeah, because Trello was my jam for like ever until Tim said stop it. Use Google. Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Hello.
Look at you guys next.
Okay. How you doing?
Hey, man.
So I seen a couple artists doing the 24 songs with 24 music videos. Usually they take like 4 or 5 months off, stock all that off, and then they plan it out within that time period, and then they just push it out every 2 weeks. Do you think that's still effective, and how would you push that if it were to happen?
Yeah, again, this isn't the end-all, be-all. Like, this is basically crafted and put together based on where we've seen the most success. It doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it. I mean, again, like I said earlier, sometimes the strategy is to just put a song out there and like don't tell anybody about it, and you just drop it out there, right? Like sometimes there's a time and a place for that. We've done some things at Syntax where we'll drop like 2 songs. It's called the Waterfall Method. I think people term it in other ways too, where and every time you drop 2 songs, like every week or every 2 weeks or however it's spaced out, it like fills in the rest of the EP. So then by the time like you get to the end, like it's all there instead of like single, and then album. That can be very effective, very effective. Sometimes the content that you're doing could potentially dictate, doing a variation on this setup, But this is a good place to start. But yes, absolutely. I mean, like, yeah.
So mine kind of piggybacks off of that. As far as for most artists, when it comes to the longevity of a record, right? You put out a record, you promote it. When, and from your perspective and from an editor perspective, when should we like stop promoting that record because it's too old? And to piggyback off of that, like how long between releases before we're considered like a non-active artist? If that makes sense.
Yeah. The second question, I don't think there's a time limit on that specifically. So one of our clients is Martha Munizzi. She's actually based out of Orlando. She's a worship artist, gospel artist. And we went, I think, 10 or 11 years between projects with her. And it's like we just picked right up where we left off. Actually, even better, because 10 or 11 years ago was a completely different game in terms of streaming music. It was still kind of finding its way then. So obviously she's, been in the game a long time and has an established following, a pretty large one. So, it was a little easier to kind of go into the editors and say, oh yeah, well she's won a Grammy, and all that. That helps. But I was concerned about that. And we ended up having some good success with that. So yeah, I mean, it could depend on a case-by-case thing too. As far as the previous content, in terms of like promoting it, like obviously there is a shelf life for things like go and buy my record, like on social media and things like that, especially if it's like 3 years old or whatever. Like, you're not gonna say it like that. Now, from my perspective, as like somebody that manages a catalog and all that, I mean we're constantly trying to go through archived material and seeing where it can fit, and it's daunting because it's like right now we're putting together Christmas stuff to send to the DSPs and say, okay, here's our Christmas catalog, right? That comes around every year, right? And the holiday stuff, that's evergreen. It's kind of a joke, but we're just talking about Christmas, right? Yeah, okay. But yeah, so like when you say promote, I assume you meant like, getting on there somewhere and saying like, hey, go buy this record, it's really good, and it's, and somebody goes and it's like, this is 3 years old, what is he talking about? Yeah. But as far as catalog or cataloging, it never ends. I mean, there's always opportunity. That's kind of what I meant too by things like, what can you take from a song or a project and apply it to something else? Like, can you create a devotional out of this thing? You know, that's one example, like one example. Let me hit this side of the room. Hang on one sec.
Pretty quick. So pretty much, I guess, let's say if I send my music off, right? Is the content, like, let's say you can say, God loves you, blah, you saying that. If when a record sounds preachy to them versus if it's creative, I guess you could talk about God, be creative in it. Those records kind of like the ones they want to like push more versus the ones where you're being real preachy in. And then also, if you take like stuff in the world, like I had a song idea about doing a song about Kevin Durant. It was like a sound bite. He said, "You know who I am." I was going to use that and be like, people that when they try you or the enemy tells you you can't do it, like, you know who I am. Like using stuff like that in your songs, or those songs that kind of like grab their ears for them to use.
I would say to answer that question, my gut answer to that is don't create music, you know, with playlisting or appeasing an editor ever. Like that's just going to kill your creative process. It's going to kill your passion. It's going to, you know, like if that's the aim, and I know that's not technically what you were getting at, but just kind of as a overarching just thing, like don't create music for that purpose. To kind of answer your question is, I mean, all of the DSPs, you know, they have editors that are focusing on specific genres of music, and you know, the one thing I've learned about editors and the digital service providers is that it's always changing. The goalposts are always moving. There's never a rhyme and a reason for what they do. There's some songs that get on huge playlists, and I'm like, what? Like, really? And then there's other songs that's just like, you know, like that should have been on that playlist, like, and it didn't even get a sniff, you know. So it's a tough thing to kind of work, and that's why, again, I would say, like, you know, create what comes from your heart, and yeah, I mean, that's really just the best approach. Yeah. A top social media platform. That's actually a really good question. I would be inclined to say no. I don't think that really matters to them. They do look at socials. I don't to what degree, which ones, you know, consider that more or whatever. I mean, I will use sometimes in my pitching, you know, I will say like, you know, so-and-so's got 1 million followers on Instagram or whatever. At the end of the day, I don't think it's going to make or break anything. Again, like I said a minute ago, like I've had artists who have like nothing, you know, nothing, and get on a playlist because I pitched it and the editor listened to it and liked it. You know, like the general vibe that the DSPs want to portray is that they're the tastemakers. They're the cool people that actually know, you know, what's good and what's not. So they like to say they don't look at that stuff. I know they do, but sometimes they prove me right. You know, they'll play something that, you know, I thought would not even get a look because they don't have a social media following, but they truly like the music. And hey, the music, right? It matters. Like, thank you very much.
Super quick question, just because I'm new to the game. What was those production distribution sites you were saying again, the popular ones?
TuneCore, DistroKid, Orchard, I think. Yeah, TuneCore and DistroKid, I think, are probably the most popular ones. And I do know that you guys would actually know better than me if you use those regularly, if there's ways to like pay for services that will actually pitch your music. You know, one thing actually I do want to make sure I say before we end, and how am I on time? Do I need to wrap up like now? I keep going a little bit, answer some more questions, or do I need to wrap up? Wrap it up? Okay. So one thing I want to make sure I do say, I know you guys are smarter than this, but it's just worth putting out there into the air. But I would be extremely, extremely cautious ever working with anybody that claims they can get your songs on playlists. Things like, hey, I'm a firm and I work with artists, and you have a single coming out? Okay, well, for $500, I can work your single and I can guarantee you placements on playlists. I know you guys would never do that, but don't ever do that. I'm not saying like they couldn't, but if the DSPs found out that that was happening, they will shoot you down in a heartbeat, and it would be a hard climb to get back to the good graces of that. And for sure, like if I see stuff all the time, like in my social feeds, these things claiming, like guarantee playlisting, for this or that much money. Like again, I'm not saying they couldn't do it, but don't do it. I promise you, it's not worth it. And there's never a guarantee with playlisting. By law, the DSPs are not allowed to do pay-for-play. Like I know it probably happens at various levels and at various things and various points, but by law, they're not allowed to do that. But yeah, they will know, and especially if like you typically average X amount of streams per your singles, and if Spotify sees that all of a sudden you drop a single and within a week it's gotten like 250,000 streams, they're gonna know and they're gonna shoot it down, and it's gonna be a hard road to get your profile back. So highly recommend don't buy into that. It's trash. Well, I'm gonna be hanging around, so if you want, I can email you the presentation. I know there's a lot of words and stuff up there, so happy to forward that to you. Yeah, thank you for being here. Flavor Fest, give it up for Flavor Fest.